Welcome back to Story Hustler, Murder, Mayhem, PTSD. I'm Dylan.
And I'm Mike.
Like and subscribe.
And I just want to throw in, we reached 500 subscribers, and we want to thank every one of our great subscribers for hanging on this long.
But we'll get to that later. We're diving back into Daughters of the Cult, and so often we focus on the women in these fundamentalist religions. But today we have an awesome interview with a unique perspective, one of the sons of Ervil LeBaron, Hyrum LeBaron. Thank you so much for talking with us today.
You're
We
welcome.
wanted to really get your reaction to the reactions since the Hulu doc dropped.
Well, I was really pleased with how it came out, and there's a few things that I didn't really agree with how they did, but we knew that was going to happen going in. That
Mhm.
this was one I wasn't making this documentary; somebody else was, so there was going to be parts that I probably didn't agree with. But overall, I thought it was very well done. Um, so many parts of it were just so well done that I really enjoyed it,
Mhm.
and it was pretty cathartic to actually do the interviews and stuff. I find that every time I talk about this a little bit more, it just kind of unravels a little bit of the pain and the trauma and all that kind of stuff, and just helps kind of like release its hold just a little bit more every time. So I'm enjoying talking about it.
And how many years would you mark in your life that you were in and then you were out?
I was in from birth till about 16, 17 years old when Dan Jordan was murdered. That's pretty much where it ended for me.
And as Dylan mentioned, we so often tell the stories or hear the stories of women who have gotten out are now fighting or to expose what they had been through. But the male voice and the male victim sometimes we don't talk enough about. And you really were that voice in the documentary. I don't know if you want to be characterized as a victim because you seemed like a hero, the little boy who opened the door. But just tell us what it was like for you growing up with Ervil LeBaron as a father.
So first thing is, I don't really consider myself a hero. I just survived, and because I had to, and then I've tried my best since then to thrive. Um, but to be fair, like I actually didn't know my dad very well. I lived with him maybe 2 months out of my life, maybe a few more. I don't really. I was young, so I don't really remember. I lived with him in Mexico in a same apartment with him for, like I said, a few months. He interacted with me maybe 3 or 4 times. I called him T.O., and I thought his initials were T.O., and turns out I was calling him uncle
All right.
in Spanish, so Tio, and I didn't realize that. And I had a vague notion that he was my dad, really, but it wasn't like I didn't have a really strong like bond with him. I didn't have a real connection with him. So most of my memories actually come later than that, um, from when I was in Denver in Colorado under Dan Jordan. So that's where most of my memories come from. Most of the time, the things that I can recount, um, because my dad went to prison and died. He died in prison when I was 9 years old.
Mm.
So I didn't really know him very well. I didn't learn like any doctrine from him, anything like that. It was all from Dan Jordan from that perspective.
What was your life like under Dan Jordan? What was kind of your experience?
It was it was awful. So I'm a Gen Xer, and there's kind of the trope of, we were raised tough and we drank from a hose, and didn't wear helmets and all that kind of stuff. So to take something like that and just times it by 1,000, it was we would go from having just overbearing adult supervision, to just being left to our own devices for days on end, or just daily. You'd have times where you didn't have any adult supervision. You were kind of Lord of the Flies to some degree, and very authoritarian, very uh, purity culture. Just a lot of, we weren't allowed really to make friends at school. We had to go to school because it's illegal not to send your kids to school. But he definitely didn't like that. That For his kids he liked it fine, but for the LeBarons and others in that group, it was not a real priority for him.
You,
We would
you,
come.
you were really just a mechanism to make Dan money.
I think that's a pretty good description. That's not how it was spoken of, obviously, but that's pretty much what I think was happening. I would go to school, come home, go to work right after school, work till 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, come home, sleep for a few hours, go to school again the next day, and just wearing the same clothes I wore the day before, greasy and dirty, and go to school and come home, work. I mean, immediately home, no extracurricular activities, no hanging out with friends, no nothing. Immediately home, immediately go to work again until 1 o'clock in the morning, sleep for
Wow.
a few hours, go to work again. And then that was 6 days a week. Of course, Saturday, since there was no school, you'd just work all day. And then Sunday we would do church all day, and it was a morning till night affair that involved like multiple, groups of people broken up into, the little kids go to a little Sunday service here, and then the teens go to this other class, and we did the economics classes, uh, priesthood classes, just all kinds of different classes during the day. And then the last meeting at the end of the night, at the end of the day, was they called it the council, and that was where the adults got together and talked about business, and they would discuss, the business they were running, appliances, church business, whatever. And then one of the things they did always is bring up charges against people that had done anything wrong, something bad during the week. And pretty regularly, that was me. Um,
How were you
I was
punished?
Yeah, what was the consequence?
Yeah, what were the consequences?
40 lashes. 40 lashes in front of the congregation was it didn't always have to be 40, it could be less, but 40 was pretty standard. And they would, at once they brought up the topic of who had done something bad during the week, and they would hear the evidence or whatever. Pretty much, if you brought up charges, you were guilty, and they would discuss that, decide your guilt, and then when they decided your guilt, they would bring everybody else into the big main room of the house, because our church services were just held in someone's house, usually Dan Jordan's house, but he had a big house out in Strasburg, Colorado, and they would bring everybody back in, lay you in front of the congregation, and then usually 4 people would take turns giving you 10 lashes each. And you're just laying in front of everybody getting whipped for random stuff that, I mean, to be fair, I was a hellion. I caused a lot of problems, and I did a lot of bad stuff, but I got
Yeah,
whipped for things I did do.
What were the infractions?
yeah, what did you do wrong?
It's it varied. I could tell you one story of one reason I got whipped for is part of my job was, so sometimes we worked in a warehouse, like repairing appliances or cleaning or whatever. But part of mostly what I did was what we called pickups. You put an ad in back then, the Craigslist of the time was the Thrifty Nickel or a newspaper ad or something like that. And so mostly what I did, they put an ad in saying, hey, we'll buy used appliances from you. And so people would call and say, hey, I have this old washer that I got a new one and I need to get rid of this old one, or a refrigerator or dishwasher or whatever it was. So my job was to go, usually with my sister, Celia, and we would drive around all day to these people's houses and buy these appliances from them. But it wasn't always Celia. I did it with my mom a few times, did it with various other people. And one of them was one of Dan's wives. We would load these appliances on a truck, and for a young kid, I was pretty strong. We'd actually stack them like three deep on the back of the truck, and all the way back, stacking appliances, and putting padding on them to keep them from scratching each other up and stuff. And then so one day I was out in a parking lot behind one of the houses that had a ADU, an additional dwelling unit, where some of the sales was done out of, and I was loading up the appliances to take them somewhere else, and the person that was my driver, because I was 12, 13 years old, 11, 12, 13 years old at this time. I was 95% done. All I had to do was tie everything down. And she came out and was like, what can I do to help? And I was like, just shut up and stay out of the way. Because I was already done. So, and I didn't have a lot of respect for her. So, which is probably not the right thing to do at that age, but I was kind of feisty,
Boy,
and I was
if that's your biggest transgression, buddy, doing talking back, I think my kids and me all were guilty of it. And you got full
well,
lashes for that.
not that's not the whole story though. So she was upset at me, and then one thing, all the trucks we drove and the vehicles we drove were all old junkers, and so this truck didn't have the door handle on the inside of the truck didn't work. So she waited till we got in the truck and left to then decide to punish me. So she drove out of the parking lot, pulled off on the side of the road, and then leaned over and started slapping me. And so I just rolled down the window and tried to reach outside the truck and open from the outside, and I couldn't open it. So I just bailed out the window and I just walked to the shop, which was, a 2 hour walk from where we were. So I was just like, I'm not going to just sit here and let you beat me in this vehicle.
Right.
And so that's
Was
what I got the
physical
whole.
was physical abuse, was physical abuse really part and parcel of your upbringing and the upbringing of your brothers and sisters?
Oh yeah,
Back,
physical abuse, emotional abuse, psychological abuse, just any kind of abuse you could possibly imagine. That was just run of the mill, everyday occurrence. Um, Amongst the children, it was like Lord of the Flies, fighting and just physical violence was constant. Um, Whoever was tougher and stronger got their way. Pretty much is how it went.
Wow.
And
give us
so
give
just stuff like that.
give us I'm fascinated. I've covered a good many of these sort of prophets who stem from the sort of Mormon tradition. Your father, Warren Jeffs, his father, Rulon Jeffs. I've covered a whole slew of these guys. You've been up closer to a couple of these guys, your dad and at least Dan Jordan. What is it about these guys? What do you make of them that have this kind of power and do this kind of thing to basically the people closest to them?
I mean, I think it runs the gamut. Um, like I think some people are truly just like, oh, this is what God, I mean, because you're reading the scriptures. There's a lot of violence and a lot of heinous acts that happen in religion and in their scriptures. And most people, Christians will read their own scriptures and the Bible and read it through Jesus came and did away with all that, the harsh stuff, but it's all in there. And so anybody that wants to just take almost any religion, except maybe Buddhism, take it to its fundamental roots, it's going to go back to a time where violence and abuse and misogyny and just all these negative things are just commonplace. So if you read the LDS history, it's rife with violence and abuses and polygamy and the whole thing. So you're like, well, I'm just gonna go back to the fundamentals. Well, that's what you're gonna get. So I think some people really just believe like, oh, let's get back to the fundamentals. We want to do this and we want to do it right. And so they become very passionate about it. And I think it's inevitable that it'll go astray at some point. And I think some other people are just, oh, this is a really good way to manipulate people and get power and money and women and all this other thing. So I think it really runs the gamut. I think my dad, like I said, I didn't know him, but from my best guess is that he was just sincere at first and then mentally ill. Um, I think mental illness pretty common in my family. You look at my dad's siblings and his uncles and aunts, and it's just some of my siblings suffer from different conditions. So I think I was kind of blessed in a little bit of a way that my mom kind of, I think her genes kind of evened him out. My mom's children, I think, she was very even tempered, very solid. Um, And so I think we got some of my dad's like drive and intelligence and that sort of thing from my dad. But we got evened out a little bit on just being kind and just solid, stable, mentally stable, and that sort of thing from my mom. That's what that's my opinion. But I think there's a whole, there's a whole laundry list of reasons why people are attracted to this particular brand of religion.
Did you have any good memories growing up? Were there any happy times with your family?
Yeah, there's a lot of good memories. They're sprinkled in and interspersed, and some of them are even some of my stories that I laugh about. Um, and the retelling of them are pretty horrific, but it's like I remember it as a good time. We were having fun, and we just did all kinds of. We did a lot of things that were, which were playing on the railroad tracks when trains are coming by. Like when I think of that, like we had a shop one time where we worked in had a railroad track that go by. We'd go out and as the train was coming by, we'd if you put pennies on the track in advance, they would shake off before the train got there. So instead of taping them to the train track or something, we'd just hold them until the wheel was really close and then move your hand and stuff like that. And we would sometimes jump on the trains, then just ride them 5 miles out of town until they started speeding up, and then bail off and walk back to the shop. And we vandalized a lot of stuff on those trains too, which I feel as an adult I feel terrible about. Like I breaking car windows and things like that. It was super fun at the time, so I have a lot of fond memories of those times, even if they're horrific stories or just doing things that were not that I wouldn't recommend, that I don't even approve of myself as an adult looking back.
Was your
I've, I've,
most of your childhood in Mexico?
so we moved so much that I don't even know my exact chronology of events, but um, I was born in Mexico, lived there for a few months, just because it was cheaper to have a child in Mexico. Came back to the United States. Of course, I don't have any memories till I was about maybe 3 is when my memories start kind of coming online. Um, Lived in Colorado at that point, in Denver, under Dan, if I remember correctly, and then went to Mexico when I was about 4.5 years old. Lived there for about a year or so. Came back to the United States when I was about 6, and then um, I actually came back to Texas for a little while, through Texas back to Colorado again under Dan, and then um, my mom moved us to Texas for a while. So like we just moved so much, so often that like I don't even remember I don't even know. I'm not even 100% sure if the chronology I gave you is accurate, but it's pretty close. And then we moved back to
Always
Colorado.
on the move, always on the move.
Yes, but my time in Texas with under Mark Shanoff was a very idyllic and memorable time in my life. We were happy. I have utter respect for Mark Shanoff. I think he did everything right. I don't think he was perfect by any means. Some of the things I think he did were, questionable, but like I worked in his warehouse as well, but the hours were light. Um, he wanted genuinely for all young children to get an education and be treated with respect. And um, I don't know. So I was still doing child labor at that age, working in his shop, but he spanked me one time because we were doing something we shouldn't have done. We were making little bombs out in the back parking lot and scratched it with glass jars and scratched a neighbor's car. But my memory of it, I've been spanked a bunch of times before that, and I always felt degraded and in pain and just like everything miserable about it. Didn't appreciate the method it was done and everything. But when after he spanked me, I was like, I don't like getting spanked, but that was I felt I still had my dignity intact after he was done. Like he was just spoke very candidly, like you shouldn't have done this, and I feel like I have to do something to make it very clear that was very bad, and so I'm going to do this, and I don't want to do it, but and he just like 10 lashes. Not he wasn't trying to hurt us. He wasn't like prior adults like they're attempting to inflict as much pain as they can. So to get you to break your will or whatever, he was just like, no, I just want you to remember, don't do this. And it was very, I was done. I was like, oh, you're gonna spank someone, you should do it that way, you know. So I don't think he was a perfect person, but he was just a gentle and kind. And in our time there, it was one of my childhood memories that was idyllic, where I have just good memories and had a lot of fun. And he would take us out on Friday and rent out an entire skating rink, and we'd all just be there as a family, just listening to music and roller skating and stuff. A lot of fun.
People who watch the documentary will hear a lot about a character named Mark Shanoff, and
Yes.
one of the victims of that shooting in Texas.
Yes.
Yeah, when your sisters were with us and we talked to them about this, they said we really hope that there was one takeaway for the public. I think you know what that is, and
Yeah.
What do you tell us what you think of that, and if there's any more,
Yeah, your takeaway,
your
if it's
takeaway,
different.
what you want people to take away.
So I agree with them. Their story they're trying to tell is that even though people had done some heinous things, it was there you can see your way to forgiveness, in my opinion, for that because they were abused. They were brainwashed and abused and just traumatized and just frankly could have been me. I was I like to think it's easy for me to say, "Oh, I would have never killed anybody. Oh, I would have never done this." It's easy for me to say from my position. One thing you can give Dan Jordan credit for is that he did stop murdering people. He was smart enough to realize like that brings the law enforcement, the eyeballs. Let's stop doing that. So that was never put on my plate. I never had to think about whether I would do that or not. Um, they were not so fortunate. But the reality is, it could have gone a different way, and I could have been that person. And so I like to, I agree with our position that like I think they once they were out of the influences of their cult and came to understand enlightenment in their own mind, this is wrong. My own siblings turned against it harder than anybody else. And they're like adamantly advocating against it and saying, this is done, this is over, this is all false. Nobody's doing this again. We're not involved in this. And they put forth the effort to dismantle all that. But that wasn't really my driving force for this. Um, Truth be told, when I first heard about it, it was actually a podcast that they were doing, kind of to test the waters to maybe springboard that into a movie or a documentary or something like that. And they said they interviewed Anna and Celia for that. In fact, I've heard it's most of the part for most part the podcast is actually completed, but it's springboarded to this documentary before it actually got completed, so it's kind of gone to a back burner. But I was like, whatever they're doing, I'm going to support it. That was my impetus was I'd want to support my sisters. Whatever they're doing, I'll do whatever I can to make it. Any energy I can put into it to help, I will do. And also, it was like a little bit scary to me. I got like that kind of that fear in my stomach. It was like, oh, this is gonna be a little scary to just have to talk in front of people, and I'm not really I don't really like public speaking that much. And so I was like, that fear told me like this probably means you should lean into it
Hmm.
as just for the experience and to get over your fear. Because I've taken that as a signal in my life from a young age. Like when you have that fear, you probably need to lean into that and just prove that it's not the danger that your psychology is telling you it is. And so that was kind of my impetus for wanting to do it. But then I didn't do the podcast because I was deployed at the time when that information first came out. I was in Afghanistan, um, and we got delayed coming back. So I landed in the United States from Afghanistan the day they finished um, taping for the podcast. So
Missed it.
so then when they said, hey, we're gonna now this documentary is gonna happen, and I was like, same story, I'm in. Whatever I can do to help, I will do.
Well,
And
your
then
voice was very important. What is your relationship with your sisters now? So you seem to be a very loving group.
we have a amazing relationship, and I just adore my sisters. Like you can't even imagine. We were separated so many times and for so many years. One of my sisters, I didn't see her for 15 years, maybe 16 years, and one of my older sisters. And one of the good things to come out of that atrocity is that I think we really appreciate our relationship now. How we just like every minute we're together, we're just like we're just going to absorb this and soak it up and um, just really love each other and just appreciate the fact that we can do what we want and we're going to make those choices based on power. We have the power to do that. So we get together. We try to do it every year where we just rent a big Airbnb somewhere on a coast somewhere by an ocean or something and just all go and hang out for a week. And it's just a lot of fun. Um, the first time we did it was right before Anna wrote her book, The Polygamous Daughter. And we kind of got together to do it to help her come up with the chronology of events. And try to make the little details of the story correct because it's so complex that and memories kind of fade and stuff. We figure if we all get together, we can do it, um, and get the details worked out right. And so we spent most of the time talking about that. And then we were like, this was a lot of fun. Let's do this again. So we started just doing it regularly, almost every year now. And what I found funny is that we first, um, at first, we just spent a lot of time just retelling the old stories. But every time it's just slightly less and slightly less and slightly less as we kind of work through the trauma and unpack it. And we
You
still
have
do to some. Oh, go ahead.
you have new memories to talk about.
Yes, exactly. So, and we also have a group chat with all of our siblings where we're just all day, somebody's commenting something and we're just talking about our lives and pictures and we're all Facebook friends and it's just our bond is really strong and I think partly because we were denied that for so many years that we now just really appreciate it and we're just going to hold on to it and not let anybody ever take that away from us again.
Yeah.
So,
You got
but
to,
anyway, so getting back to,
yeah,
oh, go ahead.
you go, please finish up.
I was gonna say, getting back to the original question though, is the impetus for me wanting to do this has shifted a little bit because something has been happening that I didn't really think about or anticipate. Um, is that I've had a lot of people reaching out to me, um, a lot of former colleagues, and because I know a bunch of people in the military because you always happen to PCS a lot, so you're moving a lot in the military as well, so you're always getting a new group of people. And I've just had so many people reach out to me and spouses of former colleagues that I knew and stuff, and I was just getting a lot of stories about like, hey, I've never told anybody this before, but this is what happened to me when I was a kid. And it just also struck me as like, I have this moment here where I can actually like maybe do some good for people and just hear those stories. And they were like, hearing you talk about it made me feel like, hey, you're a safe person that I can tell you've experienced something similar. I can open up. And I just used that opportunity to be like, you didn't deserve that. Um, and I'm glad you talked to me. I'm glad you said something and keep doing that. Keep finding safe people and tell the stories over and over and over again because find therapists or whatever, just safe people, friends, somebody that's safe that deserves to hear your story and just tell it over and over again. Because what I've noticed is that just telling every time you tell it, it just unravels a little bit and it loosens a little bit and it just your soul just feels a little bit freer and a little bit you just feel better. It's like it loses some of its power every time you tell the story, no matter what. So I used to, when I was young, I used to have that like the teenage like angst of like, oh, I don't want anybody to find out. This means I'm an awful person and my family is awful and I don't want anybody to know. And I just didn't. You weren't allowed to have friends anyways at school and stuff. But I was embarrassed and angsty about it. I didn't want anybody to know. But I got to a point where I was like, I'm tired of being like that. It just, I was worried about people's reaction to me, thinking I was like, I'm just gonna let them know what I am and who I am and what my family is. And if they reject me, that's on them. Like, I think I'm a pretty good person. I've been working on myself for a long time, trying to become a better person. And it's been a long, long, arduous struggle, but I've put effort into it. So I think I'm a decent human being. If you're going to reject me because of my family, that's on you. And I'd rather just know. So I started just telling my story to anybody that listened. And um, all I got ever was like interest, like, wow, and compliments. And it's a very good reception. I was like, this actually feels good. I'm going to keep doing this. So I just
The
kept doing
doc
it.
the documentary is terrific. I mean, people should
Yes.
start there. Your sister's very
Yes.
involved. You're involved. It's Daughters of the Cult,
Yeah.
Hulu,
Yes.
ABC production.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and we could talk to you for hours. I want to note that you mentioned your active duty, so
Correct.
we appreciate that.
Yeah. Thank
You
you for the
and
service.
when we were talking about, I was asking you, so what do you do? And you told me, and it seemed to fit completely with what I know about you. Tell folks what you do.
My job, in the Army, they call it an MOS, Military Occupational Specialty. It just means your job. And my job is EOD, Explosive Ordnance Disposal. And there's a ton of facets to it, but basically what we do is take explosive hazards and find a way to make them safe.
Well,
And
it's a nervy kind of thing, and we admire
yeah,
that. And I was saying, you must have a need to sort of live on the edge. given
I am I am an adrenaline junkie.
yeah, yeah.
I like riding sport bikes and jumping out of airplanes, and I've slowed down a little bit since I'm a little bit older now, but I still have that adrenaline. I need that adrenaline a little bit. And frankly, doing this interview, being a little bit scared to do it, a little nervous, that little pit,
Aw.
like I get a little bit of adrenaline rush from doing it. So like
No,
We're
it's still part of me.
So thank you for talking with us. We're running out of time, but I had one question.
Okay. All right.
You said that there were a few things that you just would have done differently. What are some of those things, if you can talk about those?
In the documentary, I don't remember his name, but there was a law enforcement officer that had a cowboy hat,
yeah.
and he I don't recall his name now, but he said something like, "Oh, this book's still out there, and they could pick it up and keep going anytime." And when I saw that, I was like, "Oh." I really just cringed, and I was like, "I wish they would have left that out of there because it's not true.
And it's
It's
sort of
totally,
it
Yeah.
struck us as one of those sound bites from a pundit
yeah,
that, you throw in, but it did
Unnecessary.
yeah, and we felt that, was it we
yeah,
my wife and Dylan and I, we all watched it with such great interest and really just you could feel connected to your sisters, to you,
yes,
and even the men from the Allred family. I mean, everybody had a lot of people affected in this, and I thought they did just really a good job
yeah,
of
yes."
talk.
Another little piece was they gave credit to the dismantling of the KOG to one of my sisters that I wasn't there, so I don't know, but just from what I've heard from people and being in contact with them, it was really one of my brothers that was really should have get that credit. And he's somebody that's done some bad things, and but he's still um, at a young age, but still when he came to the point of like, oh, this is wrong, I shouldn't have done that, and everything we're doing is wrong, and this needs to be dismantled. And he went to the FBI and gave them all the information they need to just dismantle everything. And so I think they gave kind of the wrong credit there at one point. I don't want to say his name because he lives a private life now, but little things like that, but nothing overall. It was a very well done product.
We agree. We
Yeah,
agree.
I'm pleased with it.
We're
Yeah.
running out of time, but hey,
Okay.
come back. Come
Yes,
back.
you're
I
welcome
Oh,
feel like
anytime.
we just scratched the surface here.
Yeah, there's so
as
many
you can
more.
see, I enjoy talking. I'm a little bit of a loudmouth, so
We're good.
I'm happy to do it again.
Yeah, you're welcome anytime. Thank you again for
Hyrum
talking with us.
LeBaron, thank
You're
you.
welcome. And I have a Facebook. If anybody wants to follow me on Facebook, I have a page. It's hilarity. It's basically hilarity, but with a Y for. So it's short for. But I call myself Hyrum Hilarious.
Perfect.
I'm not super funny, but I'm funny enough to be Hyrum Hilarious.
And you provided a great that little sense of humor that the documentary needed.
Yes.
Yeah.
That moment of levity occasionally.
Yes.
Anyhow, thanks for being with us.
Yep.
Yeah.
You're welcome. Thank you.
This is Story Hustlers signing off. Good night, everyone.